The brutal life of the Neanderthals. Imagine waking up in a world where every breath stings like knives of ice. The air burns your lungs. The wind howls like a living creature, and every shadow might be something that wants you dead. You have no house, no warmth, no mercy from nature. Just your hands, your instincts, and the faint hope that you'll survive another day. This was life for the Neanderthals. They weren't cavemen out of cartoons. They were a separate kind of human, built for survival in a frozen hell, short, wide, and incredibly strong. Their bodies were engines of endurance. Their faces carried the marks of battle and weather, and their minds, sharper than most people realize. For over 200,000 years, they ruled the Ice Age, hunting monsters, defying extinction, and carving out a fragile existence across Europe and Asia. But in the end, even their strength couldn't save them, because when nature, hunger, and another species of human all turned against them, their fate was sealed. So what was their world really like? To understand that, we have to step into the cold, into a land where survival was the only law. The frozen world. The world of the Neanderthals wasn't green or gentle. It was an endless battlefield of ice. Europe back then was nothing like the forests we know today. It was a wasteland of frozen plains, gray skies, and winds that sliced through bone. The sun barely rose above the horizon, and when it did, it offered no warmth, just light to see how empty the world had become. Temperatures could drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Snow swallowed everything. Trees were rare, twisted, half-dead things clinging to the soil. Even finding a single log big enough for a fire was like striking gold. The land smelled of frost, smoke, and decay. Every day was a fight against cold and hunger. The few plants that survived were bitter and barely edible. Moss, lichen, and dry shrubs. If you were lucky, you'd find the tracks of something alive, a deer, a bison, maybe even a mammoth moving slowly through the storm. And when night came, everything turned deadly. The wind roared through caves like screams from the past. Frost crept over skin. Fire was life, and if it went out, so did you. But somehow they endured. They didn't just survive the cold. They mastered it. Their bodies adapted to the darkness, their instincts sharpened by centuries of struggle. Still, even in their harshest shelters, danger was always waiting. Because when the cold didn't kill them, the world inside their caves almost did. Shelter in the shadows caves were their homes, but calling them safe would be a lie. Inside, the air was thick with smoke. The walls dripped with moisture, mold crept along the stone, and the ground was cold enough to numb your legs within minutes. Fires flickered, painting red light across damp rock, the only warmth between life and death. But these caves weren't just shelters. They were time capsules of survival. Ashes, cracked bones, broken tools, layer after layer of life buried beneath the soil. Every generation added its own scars to the earth, leaving behind a silent story written in stone and soot. Still, even the deepest cave couldn't hold back danger forever. Sometimes the darkness moved. Hyenas, wolves, even cave bears twice their size could slip inside, tearing apart sleeping families before anyone could scream. Disease spread easily, choking entire groups in silence. And when food ran out, they had no choice but to leave, stepping into blizzards that could kill in hours. So the Neanderthals did something extraordinary. They started building shelters of their own, out in the open, under the sky. Their homes weren't made of wood. There wasn't any instead. They used what the dead left behind. Mammoth skulls, rib bones, tusks driven into the frozen ground and covered with hides, sealed tight with stone fires burned in the center, and dry grass lined the floor like primitive insulation. It wasn't comfort. It was survival architecture, a handmade fortress against extinction. At night the wind howled outside, and the bones creaked like ghosts whispering above them. But inside, families huddled close, skin to skin, fire to fire, and dreamed of morning. But when the firelight faded, one need never disappeared: hunger. And for the Neanderthals, hunger ruled everything, the hunt for life. For the Neanderthals, hunting wasn't a choice. It was existence itself. Every meal was a victory bought with blood. Every hunt was a gamble with death. No meat meant starvation. No fat meant freezing. No hide meant no shelter. They didn't hunt rabbits or birds. Their prey were giants: mammoths, woolly rhinos, bison, wild horses, and cave bears that could crush a man with one swipe. Imagine facing a beast twice your size, armed with nothing but a wooden spear tipped with sharpened stone, and knowing that if you missed, you'd never see the sunrise again. Their hunts were brutal and personal. No bows, no arrows, just raw courage. They got close, dangerously close, driving their spears deep into flesh, while others circled behind blood, steamed against the snow. The air filled with shouts, roars, and the sound of survival itself. They worked together, wordless communication through gestures and instinct. A glance, a nod, a movement of the hand. That was their language of war. Some distracted the prey while others struck from the sides. One wrong move and the hunter became the hunted. When the kill was finally down, the real work began. The carcass had to be butchered before the cold set in. Before predators caught the scent, bones were cracked open for the marrow. The skull split for the brain, precious fuel for fire and body. The hide was stripped clean to wrap their shelters and their children. Even the tendons were saved, dried, and turned into thread or rope. Nothing was wasted, not a drop, not a breath. Every piece of life was repurposed to hold off death a little longer, their spears, their tools, even their teamwork, all built from desperation, discipline, and a deep, instinctive knowledge of the world around them. But sometimes the hunt failed. The herds vanished, the weather turned, and when that happened, survival took a darker, more desperate turn. Because when food ran out, the unthinkable became reality, and hunger turned them against their own, when hunger turned to horror. Hunger was the one enemy they could never escape. Storms would roll in without warning, trapping them in their shelters for days. Herds would vanish into the distance, leaving only empty tracks frozen into the snow. The fire would burn lower, bellies would ache, and eyes would start to turn toward one another. It's a truth that chills us even now. When all food was gone, sometimes the only thing left was each other. Archaeologists have found the proof. Human bones marked by flint knives, split open just like animal carcasses. Skulls cracked for the brain, femurs crushed for the marrow. The same cut patterns, the same burn marks from the fire. It wasn't ritual, it wasn't cruelty. It was the oldest instinct of all: to survive. When someone died, from cold, sickness, or an accident, their body became a lifeline for the living. Each piece meant another day to fight, another night by the fire, another heartbeat in the endless dark. They didn't do it out of malice. They did it because nature offered no mercy. In their world, morality froze long before the rivers did. Yet even in that darkness, traces of humanity endured. Some bodies weren't consumed. They were buried carefully, with stone tools laid beside them or flowers scattered across the grave. Even when hunger ruled them, something inside still remembered what it meant to care. It's a haunting contrast. The same hands that took life also protected it, and that fragile compassion, that instinct to care, might be the reason their kind survived as long as they did. Pain, medicine, and compassion. Every Neanderthal carried scars, a map of survival carved into their flesh. Broken bones from hunts gone wrong, cracked ribs from falls, deep gashes from tusks and claws. For them, pain was as familiar as cold air. But here's what's surprising. Many of those wounds healed. That means they weren't alone. Someone stayed behind to feed them. Someone kept the fire alive. Someone waited until they could walk again. Archaeologists have found skeletons of Neanderthals who lived for years with shattered limbs, missing teeth, even twisted spines. Injuries that should have been fatal, yet they survived. That's not chance. That's compassion. In a world where every resource was scarce, caring for the injured was a risk. It meant sharing food, sharing warmth, slowing the group down, but they did it anyway, because even in that brutal world, they still understood loyalty. And maybe even love. They also knew how to heal. They cleaned wounds with ash, used moss as bandages, sealed cuts with animal fat. Some evidence even hints at herbal remedies, plants used for pain or infection long before medicine had a name. These weren't mindless brutes. They were problem solvers, learning from trial and pain. There are even signs of amputations where the person survived. Think about that. They found a way to stop the bleeding, to fight infection, to keep someone alive with nothing but instinct and firelight. It's easy to picture them as savages. But maybe the truth is far more human. They didn't just fight the wild, they took care of one another in the middle of it. Their strength wasn't just in their hearts, it was in their very bones. Every inch of them was engineered by evolution to survive what would destroy us. The superhuman-bodied Neanderthals weren't just strong, they were built like nature's answer to extinction. Every part of their bodies told the same story. Survive or die trying. They stood shorter than us, but wider and thicker, like human tanks. Their rib cages were barrel-shaped, their bones dense as iron, shoulders broad, arms short but powerful. Their hands could crush flint into dust. If a modern human tried to live their life for even a week, their body would collapse from exhaustion. And it wasn't just muscle. They had biology on their side, higher natural creatine levels, meaning their muscles could store more energy. They didn't need to train. They were born strong. Their lungs were massive, built to pull oxygen from thin, frozen air. Their skin likely thicker, their fat relatives richer in brown tissue that burned like an internal fire, keeping them warm in deadly cold. Even their faces were weapons of adaptation. Large noses helped heat the air before it reached their lungs. Heavy brows shielded their eyes from glare and wind. And those eyes, set deep and wide, could see in dim light better than ours ever could. They weren't clumsy or primitive. They were specialists, fine-tuned for an Ice Age world. Their brains were even larger than ours, wired for spatial awareness, muscle control, and vision. They could sense danger in the dark, track prey by scent, and move through frozen forests like ghosts. But all that strength came with a cost. They were built perfectly for the world they knew, and nothing else. When the world began to change, they couldn't. And soon, a new kind of human would walk into their territory, one weaker, smaller, but armed with something far more dangerous. The clash with Homo sapiens. Around 45,000 years ago, the silence of the Ice Age was broken. By footsteps, a new kind of human had arrived. They came from the south, smaller, leaner, but with sharper minds and deadlier tools. Their name was Homo sapiens, us. At first, the two species shared the same frozen landscapes, hunting the same animals, drinking from the same rivers, sleeping under the same cold stars. For a brief moment, The world held two kinds of humans at once. They met in caves, on plains, maybe even over campfires. Archaeologists have found tools from both species lying side by side. Proof that they interacted. Maybe they traded ideas. Maybe they fought. Maybe both. But coexistence has never been easy. To the Neanderthals, these newcomers must have looked strange. Taller, faster, armed with lighter weapons and complex language. They moved in larger groups, planned better, communicated with words and symbols. The balance of power began to shift. There was contact, and there was conflict. Some encounters turned violent, smashed skulls, broken bones, clear signs of attack. But there was also connection. DNA tells us that they interbred every person alive today outside of Africa, carries about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. That means their story didn't end in total separation. A part of them lives on, inside us. Yet even that legacy hides a darker truth. The genetic evidence suggests most of those unions weren't equal. The Neanderthal Y chromosome vanished. That means their men didn't pass on their bloodline. Over time, they faded. Not just in numbers, but in memory. It wasn't a single war that ended them. It was slow erasure. One birth, one death, one lost generation at a time. And as the newcomers spread across their lands, the Neanderthals began to vanish. Not with a bang, but with silence. The final extinction. There was no great battle, no last stand. The Neanderthals didn't vanish overnight. They faded away, like the dying glow of a fire left untended. It started slowly. Camps once filled with life grew quiet. The tools stopped changing. The ashes went cold. One by one, the hunting grounds emptied, until all that remained were bones buried beneath the snow. They weren't wiped out by war, but by 1,000 smaller deaths. The climate began to swing wildly. Warm one decade, frozen the next. Herds disappeared, forests turned to ice. Small scattered groups couldn't adapt fast enough. Each winter took a few more lives. Each lost elder took a lifetime of knowledge with them. Skills, stories, techniques, gone forever, erased before they could be passed on. Their numbers had always been fragile. Maybe 50,000 across all of Eurasia. That's fewer people than one modern stadium holds. So when the storms hit and the humans multiplied, the math of extinction began. Some tried to join the newcomers, and a few succeeded. Their blood mixed into ours. Their strength folded quietly into the human genome. In that sense, they never completely disappeared. A piece of their endurance, their will to survive, still lives in us. But as a people, as a world, they were gone. The last known Neanderthals lived in the caves of Gibraltar, their fires flickering against the rock around 37,000 years ago. After that, nothing. Just silence. They left no cities, no temples, no names, only charred bones, stone blades, and ashes sealed beneath time. But from those fragments, one truth emerges. They were some of the toughest beings ever to walk this earth. They faced what would have destroyed us, and they did it for hundreds of thousands of years. They weren't beasts. They weren't mistakes. They were survivors. And maybe deep down, that survivor's spark, the one that kept them alive in the dark, is the same fire that still burns in us, the last echo of the Neanderthals. In the end, the Neanderthals didn't fail. They endured. For over 200,000 years, they defied ice, predators, famine, and time itself. They adapted to a world that wanted them dead. And somehow, they carved out a life anyway. Maybe their story isn't one of extinction, but of transformation. Because they're still here, in our DNA, our strength, our instincts. When we push through the impossible, when we refuse to give up. Maybe that's the part of us that remembers them. They didn't leave behind monuments or written words, But they left something greater. Proof that survival isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about facing a world that wants to break you, and not letting it. So the next time you see snow falling, or feel the wind bite against your skin, remember, there was once another kind of human who stood against that same storm, and survived long enough for us to exist. If stories like this fascinate you, if you love uncovering the forgotten chapters of human history, make sure to subscribe, because there are countless more worlds buried beneath our feet, waiting to be unearthed.